This Choircast podcast is brought to you by Heretic 2 by Matthew J. DiStefano. Ready to challenge everything you thought you knew about faith? In Heretic 2, I dive into LGBTQ affirmation, rejecting divine violence, and embracing universalism in a bold post-Christian perspective. If you're done with outdated dogma and want a justice-oriented, inclusive view of spirituality, then this book is for you. Get Heretic 2 wherever books are sold and start rethinking faith today. This Choircast podcast is brought to you by High Minds. Join host Andy Colenso and Matthew J. DiStefano as they tackle culture, justice, spirituality, and all the big questions shaping our world. High Minds isn't about talking points or hot takes. It's about deep, insightful conversation that inspires and challenges. Tune in to explore new angles, question the status quo, and elevate your thinking. Listen to High Minds wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Radical Love Life, an ongoing series of conversations with thought leaders exploring faith outside the boxes. Hosted by Mark Dilcomb and Kelly Wilson.
Hey, Mark.
Hello, Kelly.
How are you?
I am freaking awesome, as always. How about you, my friend?
I'm doing well. I mean, I have been in recovery from wave after wave of COVID this month.
Right. You know, and that's kind of crazy
the
because
gift that keeps on giving.
Indeed, my friend, I feel for you. January is a little tough for me too, from a health point of view, but I don't think I could ever blame it on COVID. I did a test, but it's just the nasty, the chest cold kind of stuff. And then I got hit with some norovirus, because, you got to have some stomach fluid in there too.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Well, I know that. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to love it. So
That's right.
All right. Well, so other than that, how are you, my friend?
I'm good. It's the country and our news right now, the way it is. It's all about like gauging, my level of like crisis mode to make sure, because I feel like, we have to be ready and active, but we also can't be overwhelmed by everything. You can't like live in that space all the time. Like in some cases, just like living your life and having joy is an act of resistance. So.
I agree, brave friend. And thank you for saying that. I shared with you maybe offline, I don't know if in an earlier episode, but for me, coming out of the holiday season, Christmas and into the Epiphany, it was like a couple of epiphanies, one of which was that, my soul will not be crushed. I will refuse to give up my joy, even though there's stuff going on in our country right now that I am, wow, it can be overwhelming. But also I know that I need to take care of myself. And that means I just need to shut down some of the news and other content that I know will be very triggering for me, because, it's coming to realization that control the controllables, which is one cliche, but essentially there's only so much that I can do. But to your point, the one thing that I have control over is how I put myself out in the world, whether it's what we're doing with Radical Love Live or any of the other projects, like Divine All Along, et cetera, that, those things will continue regardless of what the current state of our government is. So, yeah. So, well, so what brings us together today, my friend? What are we up to?
Today we have a great guest. We have Dana Hicks, who's an Amazon bestselling author, public theologian, ecclesiastical disruptor, and whose writings revolve around the themes of culture, change, and spirituality.
I like disruptors.
Yeah, he's out in Phoenix, Arizona, and he's president of the Open Table Network, progressive network that ordains faith leaders.
Indeed.
So they can be people of love within communities of love.
Indeed.
And also is the chief operating officer for Azura, a social services agency that exists to alleviate poverty in the state of Arizona. And we're also want to talk about his new book, The Quest for Thin Places: How to Find Spirituality After Deconstruction. So Dana, welcome. It's really great to have you here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
I bet you are. Let's see, Kelly, I'm sure you already have a couple of questions ready to go, don't you? Because you always are prepared.
Well, I've done a little bit, but love to like set a baseline. Sure. Dana, if we could talk a little bit about your spiritual background, kind of like how you got from here to there or there to here.
You bet. Yeah, I grew up in a small evangelical denomination called Church of the Nazarene out of the Wesleyan tradition.
Mm.
Are you familiar
No
with
way,
those,
we got
with those
another
guys?
Nazarene. I don't think I did know that. Yeah,
What,
I
your
grew up.
Nazarene, we have gaydar.
My
folks,
na-
we do.
yeah,
But
look at
don't
my
you
like
have a like
Nazarene.
Nazarene
Nasdar.
radar? Like, oh, okay.
So,
All right.
Yeah,
Keep
I
going,
grew
well,
up.
Brian.
well, I did notice his halo earlier, so I thought he
Oh, that's what
was
it was.
from the
It's
holiness
the
tradition
holiness, right?
somehow. Yeah. Anyway,
That's
go on. Sorry,
that's
I
too funny.
interrupted you, Dana.
Yeah, in fact, Kelly, we were talking earlier about how my parents met in New Jersey. They actually met at the Trenton First Church of the Nazarene, is where they met.
Oh
Oh,
wow.
boy.
So,
Mm.
so yes, I owe my existence to New Jersey and the Church of the Nazarene. So,
Wow.
Wow.
but yeah, grew up in that. My father was a minister in the Church of the Nazarene, still ordained with them in his 80s now, retired. But I started in ministry at the ripe old age of 22 as a youth pastor, and
Wow.
I was in it for about 30 years, mostly with Church of the Nazarene. I got kind of tired of them and planted a church with the United Methodist Church in Boise, Idaho.
Whoa.
And
Okay.
discovered that fundamentalism is just as nasty on the liberal side as it is on the conservative side.
Are we going to talk
so-
about that?
Well, we could talk about
Yes.
that too.
No,
Yeah.
no, there's something to be said about that. And there's a very valid point about that, because we talk about intolerance. Oh, Kelly, is that your phone?
It is. It's God calling. It's like, go easy, Tiger. Yeah.
That's it. All right. So you planted a
Yeah.
church, United Methodist, Boise, Idaho.
Yeah, and wasn't a great experience. I mean, the church itself did fine, but church plants are tenuous at best in the best of circumstances. And we had just sort of got past we just might make this, might survive stage, and COVID hit and pretty much just wiped us out. Not the disease itself, but the side effects of
Yeah.
COVID. And so that thing crashed and burned. And through
Hmm.
that and a whole bunch of other series of events, I had been in a deconstructing process, deconstructing a lot of my beliefs over the years and cycles. But that particular one kind of paired with a marriage that I was in that fell apart as a result of that. I was left holding a bunch of debt from the church plant that the denomination had said they would take care of, but then said they wouldn't. And then, so just a variety of things. I was like, that's it. I'm leaving Boise and I'm moving to Phoenix and starting over. And so my experience in Phoenix has been appropriate to the city, rising from the ashes and starting a new life here. And I like to say I do Jesus work and I get the nonprofit world to pay for it. So I work for a company that alleviates poverty in Maricopa County and in the state of Arizona, really. But we do great things that I think Jesus thinks that are important. And I just don't use Jesus' name a whole lot in it. So, but that's okay too, So it's been good. Life's been good to me. And so this new job has afforded me a lot of opportunities to write. So I started writing. And so this is my second book, but a bit memoirish, but didn't really intend it to be that way. I just kind of thought my own experience might be helpful and illustrative in some of it. So talk a little bit about my own experience, but it's mostly just hopefully it's just a guide for others that are kind of going through that same deconstruction journey and wondering what's next. And so I try not to insinuate that, oh, you must therefore duplicate my process because this is the right way to do it, but to say, here's just one journey, but, you can figure out, let me give you some tools to maybe think through how to do this on your own and figure out what it looks like for you.
Wow. And it looks like from your book that you do sort of lay out a process, like some, points along milestones along the way that a person might follow.
Yeah.
As they're deconstructing and reconstructing.
Yeah, I'm of the biased opinion that, organic things don't operate in linear fashions. They operate in cyclical fashions. The seasons of the year that we have, we go from winter to spring to summer to fall, and then we just complete that cycle again and again. And even Christian spirituality is really the rhythm of Christian spirituality is death and resurrection. We're dying to things and we're being raised in the nearness of life all the time. And so I think some people have this sort of notion that, I'm going to deconstruct from where I'm at, and then I'm going to get the right answer and I'll have it all figured out. And then I'll be able to just, brush my hands of that and be done, and everything will be great. And I'll be live happily ever after. But
Wait, stop. You mean you're suggesting that your book doesn't say that?
That's exactly what I'm suggesting is
I thought
that
you just did
perhaps,
the deconstruction. You were done. You're good.
yeah, unfortunately, it's a continual process, it's a process. And I'm sure you guys have experienced this too.
Yeah, I'm
You
jesting. I
deconstruct and
mean,
then, yeah,
you
yeah,
continue to do it.
yeah. And so I view the deconstruction process as cyclical. We go
Mm.
through it, we deconstruct, we sort of reevaluate, we rethink, we begin to ask deeper questions. Hopefully we ask deeper questions and wonder why about things, and we have the courage to sort of lean into our own anxieties and our own fears and the things that are holding us up. Then hopefully begin to reconstruct some new things and finding new rhythms of spirituality that can help us to continue to move forward. And then we stumble on something else and we deconstruct a little bit more and we find it. So for some people, they have a million little deconstructions. For others, they have major crises in their life that sort of push them over the edge and becomes a major deal for them. I kind of liken in the book, I liken it to the game of Jenga, where people, you pull out one brick and then you think, okay, I'm okay, and then you pull out another one and you pull out another and another. And at some point you start to think, okay, how many more can I pull out now before the whole thing collapses, And I think that's a great metaphor for a way a lot of us experience deconstruction, It's like, we pulled out that last brick and then it just went all over the floor and we're like, all right, I got to rebuild this now. I got to figure out how this comes back together.
Well said. I'm glad you used that. That's a really, it's the first time that I've had anybody use the Jenga analogy, but exactly because, you bring up something else and hopefully you discuss this in your book. There are going to be crisis of faith. There are going to be moments in the deconstruction. You're like, yeah, now granted, I can say that only from my experience, but of the people who I talk about, and, as we're in this conversation with you, deconstruction also means there's going to be moments where you're in darkness, and darkness is not bad. It's just darkness. It's the opposite of lightness, or that's the nuance of that. And we have to go into the darkness to actually, but in this process of the deconstruction, we find things that were self-discovered that resonates with us personally that, we feel in our heart that wouldn't be there otherwise, or certainly something that comes to us by dogma or doctrine, or because some person in a pulpit told us that we should feel this way about our faith.
Yeah. 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 In the book, I talk about liminal spaces, that space in between where, we've let go of one thing, but we haven't quite grabbed onto the next. We're like a trapeze artist who's, you're swinging from one rope to the next and you're in the middle and you're saying, please God, let there be a rope at the other end of this journey, and you're just not quite sure. It is I think for most of us, that's the most fraught thing. And the human mind does not like uncertainty and it does not like that liminal space at all. And we don't like that anxiety. And so that's why in my opinion, deconstruction takes a lot of, I think, courage, frankly, emotional courage and maturity and ability to lean into uncomfortable emotions, For a lot of us that deconstructed, we're deconstructing from things that our friends and family have held on to for generations.
Right.
And so we're leaving things that have a lot of roots to them, and it's scary and it's really frightening.
Well, and is that or discomfort with ambiguity, is that what leads people into other dogmatic versions of fundamentalism?
I think so. I think, we want to resolve it so quickly that sometimes we latch on to the first thing we can find. And those of us who have grown up in fundamentalist sort of backgrounds, that's the only way we really know to relate to faith. And so we kind of come in with that same dogmatic sort of black and white binary thinking into a more progressive way of thinking, except now we're binary about that progressive way of thinking. And we think we've made progress, but we've just switched one addiction for another, essentially.
Well said.
One of the things that you talk about in your book is the idea of institutional spirituality versus lived spirituality. Is there anything that's inherently wrong about institutional spirituality, or at least the way that it's developed in our culture, or can there be benefits to being an institution? I mean, like a church, not like a hospital.
Yeah. Like religious institutions. Yeah. It's funny. You start asking that question, and the truth is, I have a whole chapter in the book on institutions and religious institutions and spiritual institutions. And And when I wrote that chapter in the book, I started looking at my notes and I realized I've got a whole nother book here. I mean, I've got so many thoughts on this,
Yeah.
and actually that's my next writing project that I'm just in the very beginning stages of, is thinking about this relationship that human beings have with institutions. And what I say in this book is, it's really hard, if not impossible, to, unless you're a hermit, you just can't avoid institutions, generally speaking. And there's a lot of research about how human beings relate to institutions and institutions relate to human beings. What I think is really tricky about the world that we live in, I mean, our minds evolved in a world in which the largest institution was the village that we lived in of 50 people. And so human beings have a really difficult time relating to more than 50 people. But then after the agricultural revolution, thousands of years ago, it enabled us to have larger and larger groups of people, and eventually the birth of the city state and those sorts of things. And so even though we have these large institutions that have, in some cases, like the Catholic Church, over 1 billion members, or the Chinese government, 1.2 billion members, there's no precedent in human history for anything like this. And so our relationship to them, we often think of ourselves, the way we relate to them is the way we relate to a group of 50 people, which is we understand that we trust them and they trust us. But what drives an institution, especially the larger it gets, is not the well-being of the individuals, but the survival of the institution. And so you hear this all the time from people, I went to this church and it was great, and the music was great, and the preacher, it was slick, and it was fantastic. But it turns out that they chew up and spit out people all the time, because they're a large institution. They're much more interested in questions of conformity than they are questions of truth. And they're much more interested in preserving the institution than preserving anybody's feelings or even well-being.
Amen, brother.
And so I think it's inherent in some ways. I mean, we see it in religious institutions, but it's true in any institution, that's larger. Anybody that's been part of a corporate downsizing has felt that. I mean, corporations can be, it cracks me up when people are like, that corporation, all they're interested in is profit. And I think, yeah, of course, that's all they're interested in.
That's what it exists for.
That's why it exists. Exactly.
Yeah, like they would care about anything else, that they're just going to run over anything that gets in its way, including you. So yeah, I think we're in a unique place in human history where we have enormous institutions, but we don't really have a precedent in our experience to how we relate to these things. So an appropriate amount of cynicism, I think, is appropriate in this, but also just allowing our expectations to be set correctly. If I know going into it that the institution is really not that interested in me, and that, if I buck the institution, they're going to buck back, and if I know that, I'm okay with that. I think that helps a lot.
Institutions don't work that way. It's not like they give you a disclaimer at the beginning of this, it's not, to your point, they don't know how to do this. You also bring us something else because, I think about, a lot of these institutions that, of course, they're scared as well to upset their congregants, especially the ones that give them the money. And so they're in this cycle as well. So deconstruct is the last thing that they want, even if it is the best thing, at least in this moment of time. Now, granted, hopefully we'll see within fairly short order for those congregations that do survive into the future, that deconstruction is actually a beautiful thing, right? It's a gift given to us that allows us to explore and find faith that works for us individually. Of course, that's on the face, that could be, they could say, well, that's a threat to their institution. But is it though? I mean, we're proving this, and as we move forward, plenty of people are who said that they were atheist agnostics really weren't that. This is the best word they could work with at the moment, but they will be really spiritual, but not religious. And they're in the space of the moment where there's no really way to facilitate exploring the faith. And yet that's going to happen. It's not like the church just died. Jesus is not gone, but what serves us doesn't work right now either. There's there's a palpable hunger and a desire. Our heart calls us to explore these kinds of things. So that's why I feel like, in your
Yeah.
book in particular, it's very hopeful in that, but it is asking that question, what is it like to go through the deconstruction? And it may not happen as well, chances are it's not going to happen in an institution right now. So question for you with respect to your own journey. So you were Nazarene, then you did
hmm
this church plant with United Methodist, and then, that, because you said because of the pandemic really kind of brought that to an end. Was there any point, where did you have your deconstruction epiphany? Where was that in this journey of yours?
Yeah, in some ways, I was deconstructing all along the way. I think one of the
Ah,
freedoms I felt, when I was no longer receiving a paycheck from a religious institution was I
mm,
finally never felt like, oh, I have to toe the company line. I have to say
mm,
the right thing or they're going to defrock me or, kind of thing. So I think I was deconstructing for a long period of time. And part of the reason I left the Nazarenes was exactly that. I mean, there just became a point where it's like, I can't continue in good conscience even though these were the people that raised me, that nurtured me, that ordained me, it was just like, yeah, but you guys are messed up. I mean, I just can't be affiliated with this anymore. And so yeah, to answer your question, I'm not sure there was any one moment, but I think when I left Boise and I moved to Phoenix and I was no longer a pastor, and then I made friends who didn't know me as pastor. That was a huge deal for me in terms of
Hmm.
now all of a sudden I could say things or think things that I never felt like I had the freedom to talk about before. And so that was super helpful. So in the book, I talk about how, I had a partner who her name was Christina and she was Buddhist and we started dating and she kept asking me about my spiritual journey. And I kept saying, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. And she would say, I just want to learn about Jesus. I'm just really curious about Jesus. Will you tell me about Jesus? And I kept
Hmm.
thinking, are you kidding me? I mean, I found the one Buddhist who likes Jesus. What is this? And so eventually, long story short, we eventually started talking about Jesus and kind of the flood dams opened.
mm,
And it was really helpful for me to connect my past with what would be my future in terms of like thinking about spirituality. And she helped me I tried meditation before, but I say I wasn't good at it. Meditators say you're not supposed to measure how good you are at it. I mean, real meditators do, but I mean,
Hmm.
it was just really difficult, which I think it is for everybody. And I kind of gave up on it because it was so difficult. But having her kind of coach me through it and, bounce ideas off of with her was really helpful. And so that practice became really rich for me and really helpful for me. And then through that, I stumbled on a book by Michael Pollan, who he wrote a book on psychedelics.
Hmm.
And well, actually, I started reading Robert Wright's book, Why Buddhism is True, which is really fascinating. And he comes at it from a neuroscience perspective of what happens in meditation and whatnot. And that really fascinated me. He talks a lot about the human mind's default mode network and what happens when we shut that down, or we're able to slow that down and hopefully, begin to experience being fully present in a moment and how that becomes experiences of awe and wonder and beauty and transcendence and the things that we really long for. When people say they're spiritual but not religious, I think this is what they kind of mean, that they want to pursue things like beauty and goodness and transcendence and things that are bigger than themselves, but they don't really want all the baggage of institutions around it. And so Robert Wright's book really helped me. And then that led me to Michael Pollan's book talking about psychedelics and how psychedelics do the same thing. They're sort of a shortcut to shutting down your default mode network and allowing you to have spiritual experiences of wonder and transcendence and awe and those sorts of things. And so that led me to this Nazarene kid who, was a teetotaler till he was 30 years old, never done a drug in his life, to fly down to Mexico and take some magic mushrooms. And
wow.
so in the book, I talk about my experience. I had two experiences with that and what that was like and how that really opened a lot of doors for me to understand God and the universe and spirituality in much, much bigger terms than the way I had previously understood it.
Mm.
So
Yeah, it
it's
definitely
been
does
really
kind of
helpful.
rearrange the mental furniture, does
That's a nice way to say it.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
And it's,
So,
I talk to people both who, who experiment with psychedelics and other means. and also with people in sobriety who use meditation to try to achieve that spiritual path. And I'm always kind of heartened by the fact that it's all just the chemicals and networks in our brains. Like it's possible for a brain to get there without the help of a drug, but as you say, it can be a shortcut.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. It could be it can definitely be a shortcut. I think that what else has helped me is that I'm able to reflect back on that experience in my meditation time, and it allows me to sort of enter into that state of mind a little bit easier, frankly, than I could before. And so that's been really helpful. In the book, I kind of trace the history of it too. I think we think about this as, I think some people think about this as some sort of new thing, but I mean, indigenous Mexicans have been doing this for thousands of years. They've been having these religious ceremonies, and there's a lot of history of what I call technologies of the sacred that go back thousands of years. And it's really religious institutions that have sort of marginalized those experiences because they don't fit neatly into an institutional way of life. It's sort of a shortcut. We don't need the clergy all of a sudden, or these institutions,
Hey
because
man,
now
you're
we've
hitting the
got a
nail on
direct
the head right
access.
there. It's always going to be about the people that have a paycheck. When they don't need them, then that's when they tend to get a little weird, right? It's like, oh my God.
Yeah. So I could see why those have been marginalized, but I also see how this is a growing thing for people in their spiritual journeys to say, look, whether it's an ayahuasca ceremony or psilocybin ceremony or whatever it might be, they want those experiences of the dissolution of self and of transcendence and feeling that I'm both very tiny in this vast universe and also am very big, at the same time. And so those are, they're heavy experiences. And what I think one of the reasons psychedelics aren't addictive is that they're so heavy, the experiences. After you experience, you're like, okay, I'm good for a while on this,
Yeah.
I'm not sure I want to go back and do this next week,
Right,
So,
right. I was in a religion class in college one time where the professor was talking about a group, and I don't know if they're still around, who actually thought that the Gospels were written about a mushroom, that Jesus was a metaphor for some mushroom that they had discovered.
Okay.
Wild. But I want to get back to, Dana, you were talking about technology. I know that your book delves into the fact that our brains aren't necessarily evolved enough to keep up with the technology that we have. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, about how that's challenging our spirituality?
yeah. And again, our brains evolved on the African savanna millions of years ago, in groups of 50 people. And the most exciting thing you would see is you get chased by a lion every, every few years or whatever, And so, when what we experience now in terms of the constant flood of input and information into our brains just are not equipped for this fire hose of what we're experiencing. And even our kids, as their brains are developing, there's a lot of questions being asked about how good is this really for them. But in terms of, the technology itself, the dopamine rush we get every time we hear a ding when a text message comes in. I was talking to my partner last night and she got a ding on her phone text message from somebody. She goes, "Oh, I'm liked, somebody likes me. I like this." And, and that's sort of, what our brains are telling us all the time. And that's very addictive, to constantly be somewhere else instead of here and now and fully present. And we're always somewhere else in distractions and hurry and busyness and noise. And those sorts of things are just so antithetical to spiritual life but they're so ingrained in our modern world that it's hard to avoid those things. So yeah, one of the things to talk about in the book is like, how do we sort of deal with this? It's not going to go away. The internet's not going away. Social media is not going away, at least not in the immediate future. And so how do we limit those things? How do we take Sabbath from those things so that we can allow spirituality to flourish a little better in our lives? Because that it works so counter to what our souls need. It's so unhelpful.
And I think it's easy to focus on the small picture and lose the big picture. I was just thinking about this yesterday. scrolling through my news feed, and there's a guy who I've had maybe one conversation with in the last 6 years, but posted something that felt like an emergency. It was something about something that's happening at in the government. And it felt suddenly like this was the most important job in the world, was for me to
Mm-hmm.
argue with this guy. And I
Right.
really had to, and it was like this very impulsive, like animal
Mhm.
urge to be like, I'm going to fight with that guy, and somehow I'm going to convince him, and somehow that's going to affect some change in this situation. And I really had to like slowly back away from the keyboard. And
Yeah.
it took a great deal of discipline for me to even just like get my mind to relax, be like, this is not the most important thing.
No.
I'm not going to convince that guy. Even if I did, it's not like he's a lawmaker who's going to change anything. And it just like have to go back through all these steps
There's that.
where, I think like regular meditation and regular getting in touch with the spiritual, however you do it, however you find those
Mhm,
thin places where, where earth and heaven meet, can help maintain the big picture of like what's really
Mhm.
important, where I really am in the universe, etc.
Isn't it funny to think too, again, getting back to we evolved, our brains evolved in groups of 50, villages of 50, and we had no idea what was going on in the next village, much
Mhm.
less what was going on 100 miles away or halfway around the world. Whereas now, I mean, yeah, I get a ping news alert from CNN anytime somebody sneezes halfway around the world. I mean, our brains aren't prepared to be this in touch with all the suffering in the world.
No way.
And it's so overwhelming. It can be so overwhelming.
Amen, brother. Thank
and
you
I,
for calling that out, because you're right. We are oversaturating ourselves. And so this is where we have to make that decision. I can speak, for both my partner and I. We did this, some years ago, because of somebody that was in the office once, a president, and who is now back in office. Because I just couldn't
Mm.
take it. I could not do this. And I think that was one of the most healthy things that I did for me personally. And I encourage anybody to do that. Like, why are you so invested in knowing what goes on at every moment? Like, start there, just disconnect, because where is it that in our society what value actually comes out of being informed? Truly, right? I mean, I'm not
Mhm.
saying, as I'm looking up at a quote from Martin Luther King that I got above the screen, says, nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. Not suggesting that, but you just realize there are certain things that I don't need to know. It's not going to make a hill of beans difference. And me knowing, like as you said, if somebody sneezes halfway across the world, I don't need to know that. And if I trip across it and I read about it, okay, great. So there's something to be said about ignorance being bliss, and finding a healthy kind of ignorance that does work. So yeah.
One of the things I talk about in the book, in meditation, the idea, at least in the Zen Buddhist tradition, is that we're trying to eliminate the time zones of our life, past, present, future. Our minds naturally kind of gravitate back and forth, past, present, future, and we're anticipating and whatnot. And the idea is that we want to try to not think about the past, not worry about the future. Depression comes from the past, anxiety comes from the future. We want to be present in this moment. And the more we're present in this moment, the more we can be here and now, then the more centered we become, the more clear we can think about things. And I mentioned in the book, I had in some of the churches I was at, they would have these AA groups, and I would show up and I
I was going to
learned
bring that up in a
so
minute.
much
Yeah.
from them. Yeah, I learned so much from them, and one
They
of
do.
them is that one of the tools from that is that, addiction often comes from our grasping at control. That we
Absolutely.
feel like we have to control something in the world, and we can't control everything. And so, Mark, as you know, I'm sure, they end every AA group with the Serenity Prayer, which is adapted from, what's the deal? Oh, there you go. Yeah,
Reinhold Niebuhr
yes.
is credited with that one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah.
Amen.
I've
Yes.
said that prayer so much lately, and it's exactly that, right? I mean, there are things that are just out of my control that I have to let be. Just
Yes.
let it be.
Someday.
And it doesn't mean I have to like it. It just means
No.
I can't, if my fighting against it isn't going to do me any good. It's just a waste of energy to fight against it.
So there's a
And
chapter in the big book about that. It's called Acceptance is the Answer, or Acceptance
there
is
you
the
go.
Key.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a great story about that. And to your point, though, that's exactly right. And thank you for saying that. And thank you for talking about meditation. I was going to say my connection before I got sober. I tripped across here in New York City. It's called the School of Practical Philosophy. And it's really based on, Buddhism, essentially, right? And those
Okay.
forms of it. And so meditation, that's the first time I was introduced into it. And all of the craziness that was going on with me, I learned how to meditate. And like it kept the craziness at bay. Mind you, I was still active in my addiction and stuff like that, but it at least gave me a reprieve from those moments. And
Yeah.
I think it actually helped with ultimately that when that moment came for me to finally stop, I can definitely think that had a major influence. And that paid forward too when I worked on a program with Shalem Institute about contemplative meditation as well. It's like, absolutely. When you are in the present, it's not easy, but just in that space, it's not about perfection. Or as you said, it's about counting, the quality of it, trying to quantify what that experience is. This is where you find the divine, because I have a story that is directly connected to AA. Early on in my sobriety, I went to a meditation meeting, which was a contemplative meditation meeting at General Seminary here in New York. And I didn't know what it was at the moment, other than it was meditation. And I felt the presence of the divine right there. And it's the first time I had ever felt it in my entire life. Sitting in a contemplative meditation meeting in a circle around a candle with 40 other people that I did not know in, near darkness, right? And I could feel it. And there were no words. It was just simply the presence of that in that moment. Like, yep, I got it. And I quantify that as it's my first spiritual experience. Like, I felt it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so theologically, right, if we want to get back to Christian theology, I would argue this, that the divine or God, as you understand him or her,
Or they
is
or it.
fully present everywhere, that we live in a universe that is soaked with the divine. And the problem is not that the divine isn't out there. The problem is that our minds are too busy. Our minds are too cluttered. Our minds are our antenna are not up enough to be able to experience the divine. And so spirituality, I think it's pretty good Christian theology. Spirituality is really about learning to recognize the divine that's already there, not in trying to find the divine in some far off place or whatever it might be.
It's right here. It's in this
The
very
kingdom
moment.
of God is among you.
Yeah, right. Somebody said that.
This has been written about. People are like, what does that mean? It means it is with us this very moment. Do you have as you said, your antenna up to, can you receive, can you dial into that channel? And when you do, even somebody helps you with the dial, you'll be like, holy shit, this is what this is supposed to be. You'll know.
Yeah, and Jesus would constantly say, right, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. He who has eyes to see, let him see. I mean, it's there. He's trying to tell us. You just got to have the eyes to see it, So, and that, to me, that's the essence of the deepest longing of the human soul, is this desire for transcendence and experience with the divine that's not way out there. It's when I do the dishes. It's when I'm putting the kids to bed, when I'm driving to work. It's everywhere.
Dana, I have a question about, I guess it's about salvation. That, that's a topic that's always of fascination with me. And the fundamentalist background that I have, and probably the one that you have too, is all about God wants you to do something. There's always something that God wants you to do. And, you have to go through a certain process, and then you are saved from your fate. Do you still, like, having deconstructed, do you think that there's anything that humans need to be saved from, or is there something else that the divine might want from us?
I think there's a lot of obstacles. There's a whole section in the book on removal, that the secret to spirituality, traditionally, even among the mystics, in a consumeristic society, we tend to think if we add more, that somehow more is more. But for the mystics, it tend to be less is more, right? The more we remove of what isn't supposed to be there, then we get to the essence of what is supposed to be there. And so to answer your question, I think Do we need to be safe from anything? Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that need to be chipped away, in terms of what isn't real, what isn't supposed to be there, uh, but I don't think it's a magic sort of thing of, like I say, a magic prayer or something like that. I think it's doing the work of these cycles of deconstruction. And part of the beauty of deconstruction, right, is exactly that. I'm removing things that don't belong. And that's an important piece of this.
Yeah,
So
buddy.
we often feel like deconstruction is painful and it's awful. Endings are beginnings. They really are. When we come to an end in something, when we're able to let go of something, again, it's that death resurrection cycle, right? We're learning something, we're beginning something new. So I think salvation for me, it's less about like we're going to go to some, place and live on a cloud after we die that we call heaven with streets of gold and things like that, or trying to avoid a place of eternal conscious torment or something like that. And more for me now, I think it's more about how do I get in touch with the ultimate reality of the universe so that I'm in line with that. One of the interesting things about psilocybin and magic mushrooms, they're doing a lot of research now. Johns Hopkins University is doing a lot of research on psilocybin, trying to find therapeutic uses for it. And one of the things that's proven to be really effective is they take terminally ill cancer patients and they give them high doses of psilocybin in attempts to help them alleviate their anxiety surrounding death. And they've found it incredibly effective in helping people relieve their anxiety around death and dying.
Oh God, that's never thought about it. What a compassionate thing to do, because it's not going to change the reality. You know what's going to happen, but to relieve that person, that soul, of the torment and the anxiety of that, I think is probably one of the most compassionate things, because we all die.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's a beautiful thought. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. So for me then, when I had my second psilocybin experience in Mexico, I went with a high dose, and part of what I wanted to experience was what they call the dissolution of self. When you hit such a high point of psilocybin that your sense of self sort of gets dissolved into the rest of the universe. And for some people, that's pretty scary. But this is what they were trying to do with these cancer patients, was get them to this place of dissolution of self. So when I had that experience, when I came back to it, I wrote in my journal, I get it. I understand now why the cancer patients lost their sense of death and dying, or their fear of death and dying, because once you have this experience that, you know what, I'm already a part of all that is, that there's nothing that's really dying. I'm already there. I'm already a part of everything that is. You just quit worrying about it. You quit having that anxiety about it. And so questions about salvation for me now are like, it's just, I don't have an anxiety around death and dying. I'm a part of the universe. I'm a part of all that is. I'm a part of God. And so what I'm trying to do now in my spiritual journey is remove as many barriers as I can to fully understand and participate in the divine.
Well said. You're definitely on the path of the mystic. Well, you're already there. So, we still, when somebody defines themselves as a mystic, and I just threw that on you, but, it's like some people say, that's very woo. It's like, we're all mystics if you start exploring, right? It's just like we're all prophets. It's like we're all saints. Like, we think we want to put them on pedestals. Like, no, that's just people doing what they're doing. So, whether it's Thomas Merton or, John of the Cross, which, they all have their stories on why they got to be what they are. And part of that mysticism, to your point, though, is that it's the stripping away of the unnecessary layers of, I'm leaning a little bit on the, what is attributed to Pierre Teilhard de Chardin is, we're not human beings having spiritual experience, but we're actually spiritual beings having a human experience. And with that comes a lot of crap, right? As the human experience, when you start releasing it or stripping away, whatever word works best, you get to the essential essence of your soul and how you fit into the universe like that. That's a profound moment. Like, you're like, oh, okay. It doesn't mean it's, you're always going to be happy dappy and living in perpetual joy until, your life ends. You have meaning, like, and that meaning cannot be taken away at that moment.
Right. Right.
It seems like it's also what some traditions talk about is the removal of desire. that
Mm-hmm.
there's so many things in this consumer materialist society that we want, that if we can only eat that or drink that or smoke that or buy that or have sex with that or whatever, that we will be fulfilled. And is anyone ever fulfilled?
Not that way.
You know, even like the people in the biggest houses on the highest hills are unhappy and still looking for something new. So to come to the realization that these things that we desire to fill whatever that hole in us are not going to do it. And then to find that in the divine, in our connection with the divine, is, I think, a huge leap. But it's hard. I think a lot of people are like, dude, I don't have the time for that. I just take my kids to school and go to work, and I just want to go to church on Sunday and get blessed and go home.
Well, that's what Lynn Twist in her book, The Soul of Money, this is what this is all about, right? And people they're on the hamster wheel. Hell, I was on the hamster wheel for the majority of my life, right? I didn't, you know, it's just, and even I've been sober, 12 years and been on this journey that I'm on. And even then, it's not like I just woke up one moment and it's like, oh, hey, all the consumerism just, slipped away. But to your point about desire, that I'm no longer there where desire, I'm beyond that, but I had to do a lot of work to get there because we're so trained into this, like that. This is what is expected of us this is what we do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I still take pleasure in my nice Apple Watch. So,
of course,
I'm not there.
But that's
a spiritual I am.
That's right. Time is an illusion, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. What is time?
What is
social
time?
construct? Yeah.
Yeah. The most accurate watch in the world would just be a digital one that flashes now all the time. Just,
You got a good
that's
marketing
great.
plan for that, Kelly?
yeah. So Dana, as we're getting to the top of the hour, do you have any kind of parting wisdom or direction or guidance that you would give to our listeners?
Wow. Yeah. I think first, I think that I end the book. It's funny. I was right. It took me almost 2 years to write the book. And so in the middle of that, I read Brian McLaren's new book about, I forget what the title of it is, Life After Doom,
Yep.
and it's pretty dark, like we're all going to die and the world's going to end and, global warming is going to massacre us all, kind of thing. And I'm writing this book on spirituality about like, hey man, just take mushrooms and be happy, And I thought, how do I reconcile these two worlds? I mean, because they're both true, but how do I sort of tie this all together? And so in the conclusion of the book, I talk about how this quest for spirituality is, I think it's an important quest. And we don't recognize how existentially important it is. Because when we begin to see ourselves as part of everybody else, when we begin to see ourselves as part of the universe, when we begin to see how all this is connected together and that like we can't just pull things apart and say, I can survive apart from the earth. Come on, or I can survive apart from my neighbor. We are one. All of this is one together. And when we begin to see that more and more, I think that allows us to come up with transcendent solutions to the ways in which we relate to the earth, the way we relate to each other. So I think there's an urgency to this. There's an urgency to spirituality that I think that we're missing. And the role I think that I was going to say the church, but I'm trying to reframe it in a different way. The role in which spirituality needs to play in our world is important. We need a revival of spirituality, not of institutional religions, but we certainly need a revival of spirituality in order for us to survive.
Amen.
Frankly. And so if for no other reason than you don't want the world to blow up, you should read my book. How's that?
I love that. I love that. That's it. Very motivating.
I do. Yeah. Read the book or we're all going to die. That's my pitch. No, but I do think the journey's hard too. I guess this would be the other piece. As an individual, recognizing that deconstruction sucks. It gets really painful and it's really difficult, but it's also worth it.
Absolutely.
It's hard, but it's worth it.
It is so worth it.
Hang
Amen,
in
brother.
there, grind away at it. It's worth it. It's worth it. It's worth it.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you very much for this conversation. Again, everybody, the book is The Quest for Thin Places, How to Find Spirituality After Deconstruction. That's by Dana Hicks, and you can find it where books are sold.
Yes.
Yes. Or
Perfect.
audiobooks are sold as well. Yeah.
Oh, I'm
thank you,
a huge
guys.
fan. So it's good to good to know. I've got the print version of yours, but I love an audiobook. Were you the narrator for yours?
Well, yes and no.
Yes and no. Okay.
Well, I'll tell you this, and I might get in trouble for this. So just so you know,
Uh-oh.
the guy who edited my first audiobook and did the audio engineering for the first book. After I read that, it was like, this is a lot harder than I thought, reading a book, even though I
Right.
wrote the darn words myself, I'd
Sure.
stumble over it and whatnot. It took me forever to read it. And so, meanwhile, my boss told me about this audiobook that he listened to, and it was about AI. And at the end of it, the audiobook, it said, oh, by the way, this book was written with an AI generated or read to you with an AI generated voice. And it blew his mind. He was like, I had no clue, listening to the whole thing. So I had to thinking, why can't I do an AI generated voice for my book?
Amen, brother. I'm down with it.
So I found some software, did a bunch of research, talked to my engineer about it. And he said, yeah, Audible doesn't like AI generated voices. And so what I ended up doing was I found a company that would clone my voice. And so I cloned my voice. So it's my voice reading the book, but it's all AI me. It's not really me, which is a really weird experience, by the way, to listen to your own voice being AI generated back to you. That's a whole nother thing. But so, yes, I read the book as an AI person.
Oh, that is so cool.
AI
Thank you for sharing
entity
that.
or something. But yeah, it's been a unique experience. And what's been kind of fun too is like people that know me personally, they've listened to the audiobook and they're like, they have no clue. Most of them have no clue. So it's pretty weird. It's pretty creepy, but it saved me a lot of work. So.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Well, definitely another reason why to buy the audiobook as well. Dana, thank you so much for being on with us. It's been a great conversation.
Oh, thank you guys. What a great conversation. What great questions. I really appreciated the conversation a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Blessings to you, brother.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Radical Love Live, hosted by Mark Dilcom and Kelly Wilson. Recorded at the Bravery Studios in Garfield, New Jersey. All rights reserved. Find our episodes on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And check us out at radicallovelive.com, along with our personal websites at markdilcom.com and kellywilson.com. This is Radical Love Live, where we explore faith outside the boxes.
If you've ever deconstructed your faith, you know it's not easy. But just imagine if you could have people to guide you through your process. People like Jim Palmer, Kristen Dumais, Jennifer Knapp, Brad Jerzak, Brian Zand, Paul Young, and more. Well, if you head over to www.choiracademy.com and register for Square 2 using the promo code RAD, you'll get 10% off the regular registration cost of this awesome course and community just for being a fan of our show.
Embark on a journey to the heart of an isolated and restrictive island where secrets simmer beneath the surface. In Brandon Andrus's What Can't Be Hidden, follow Thura as she uncovers the dark truths of Patrida, navigating through betrayal and redemption. This tale of courage, love, and the quest for freedom will captivate you from the very first page. Get What Can't Be Hidden, available now from Choir Publishing.
This Choircast podcast is brought to you by my book, Unless a Seed Falls to the Ground, Welcoming the Death of the Whiteness Gospel. I wrote this story as a plea for white Christian America to enter into a season of hospice spirituality, to recover from the cancerous lie that we can start over, be in charge, and recover some original purity of Christianity. One friend calls it a love story to the church, the United States, and the entire human family. It's available now on Amazon.
Are you ready to embrace a deeper, more intentional way of living? Introducing Deep Calls to Deep, Meditations for Your Spiritual Journey, Volume 1 by Brandon Andrus. Deep Calls to Deep offers 1.5 years of weekly meditations to inspire spiritual growth and guide you toward a more meaningful, embodied life. Order your copy today wherever books are sold and begin your journey into greater connection and purpose. Deep Calls to Deep. Let your soul awaken.